Is the American dream unique?
So first of all, right, America was the place, right? So we moved to Canada for a couple of years, but America was the ultimate destination because of the educational opportunities here, the economic opportunities, the sense of freedom. But Canada is another country that is very similar to the US. It's similar in the sense that it has tremendous diversity by race, by religion, by immigrant origins, and a significant native population, right? But Canada's not this kind of multicultural heaven either. When I moved to Canada when I was 10, I spoke. We learned English in India in the sense that it was the medium in which we learned anything, right? I went to an English medium school, but I spoke English with an accent. And part of the assimilation process when I got to Canada was learning to lose my accent. And that is not a painless process, So I don't want to glorify a place like Canada, but Canada does have a commitment to multiculturalism, which I think is important to pay attention to. And a lot of that commitment to multiculturalism comes from the fact that you have Quebec, which is a French dominant or French speaking province. And so they've come up with all sorts of accommodations to make sure that, they respect people of different cultures and certainly people who speak French as opposed to English. In addition to Canada, I would say, so in my travels and experiences and research, Australia is another country, where you have a fair number of immigrants from Asia, from India, for example, that go there and for educational opportunities and economic opportunities. And it's a fairly open society. Now, all of these countries, the US, Canada, Australia, have all had their histories of closing their borders and being exclusionary and then opening up again and closing up again. So it's something that's actually common to these Anglophone countries, right? These are all former British colonies. And I think that's also helped, my integration and the integration of so many Indian Americans in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, and certainly in England, is not only the fact that many of them speak English or go to school learning English before they come here, but there's something about these Anglo-American societies that are built with a purpose of assimilating people, changing over time. I mean, one of the things you'll notice about the English language, American English, Canadian English, Australian English to some extent, is that it changes over time based on who comes into the country, the kinds of foods they bring, the kinds of clothes they wear, the kinds of music they produce. You get a new kind of melting pot like phenomenon in each of these countries.
And I think that makes us stronger.
There's a political philosopher or a political scientist, Roger Smith, who wrote this book called Civic Ideals. And what he says is that, America has had essentially two major strands in what animates its politics and its kind of social movement activity, right? One are all these civic ideals that you see in the Declaration, that you see in the Constitution, right? Those are our noblest ideals. America, unlike most European countries, was built on a set of civic ideals. So if you look at our nationalism, at least one major strand of that nationalism is a nationalism that is built on the idea, right? The idea of freedom and the idea of democracy and self-governance. And so that's not a country whose nationalism is based on a religion like Christianity, or a country whose nationalism is based on a race like Japan, right? So that is something very different about America, historically speaking, and that remains true to this day. At the same time, you also have this strand of ethnic nationalism and religious nationalism that sits in sometimes an uneasy tension with that. Right? So you had people fleeing religious persecution, but they were Christians, right? And in many of these colonies, they were trying to create a kind of religious utopia or community where they landed, right? The city upon the hill, which is great when you want to build a strong community where everyone is united and sharing a certain purpose and sharing a certain identity. But almost inevitably, that changes and you start to get diversification. And so then we need to figure out, how are we going to get along? And thankfully, the US has figured out, say, between Protestants and Catholics, how to get along better than, what they figured out in England.